Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to open this session on scientific writing, and before that, it's my great pleasure to introduce my co-chair, Professor Can Buskambe, Editor-in-Chief of World Journal of Nuclear Medicine. And we are going to discuss about scientific writing in this session.
Thank you very much. So can I invite Professor Saeed Sakavi to give us our first talk on how to prepare an original article. So what I think we'll do for this session, if we can, is we'll go through the 4 talks and then we'll have a discussion at the end with all the speakers, because I think that would be more useful as a group. So, thank you.
Right. You all know that scientific research and its publication is very essential for advancement of the medical knowledge. It's not only about advancement of the medical knowledge, it's also about career progression and in academic institutions, obtaining a job. The most famous phrase of publish or perish shows the importance of this issue. And if you look at the literature, you can find that there is a significant number of increase in scientific publication in the last decades. And although the scientific writing is one of the most complex skills which is required by a professional scientist, and it is surprising that it is the scientific writing is rarely, if ever, taught in the universities. So that is why we suggested this session to discuss scientific writing. Especially, it may be useful for our young scientists and physicians to be able to enter in this field. There are also significant change in the last few decades regarding scientific publication. If you just look at the 3 most important journals in the biology, Cell, Nature, and Journal of Cell Biology, and if you look at the number of the articles which are published in the last 30 years, you can see that the number of the articles actually decreased in the last 13 years. And at the same time, the number of the supplements and the number of the supplements, panels, or figures is slightly increased, and also at the same time the number of the authors are significantly increased. So it seems that gradually publication in a well-known journal is becoming more and more difficult because they decrease the number of the articles they publish each year, and at the same time they need more figures and more rich data to publish their article. There are different types of articles. You all know about it: original articles, case reports, meta-analysis, systemic review, or technical reports. But we are going to talk about original article in this talk. Actually, original article is the main type of articles that is used in scientific publication and designed to report the results of original research in either preclinical or clinical issues. The report must be complete, clear, and reproducible. It is important. You cannot cut your research in 2 or 3 publications because it is called salami publication and it is unethical. The article should be clear and reproducible, that any other one can reproduce and repeat your study easily. Usually the original article should have a title, abstract, and body of the article, and you all know that the body of the article should include IMRD, which indicates for introduction, methods, results, and discussion. So I try to give a short and rapid review of all of these sections. Actually, the introduction should be a brief description of the subject, including the prevalence and importance of the issue, and we should explain controversies on that and address the unresolved problems, but it should not be an extensive review. If we can clearly mention the question that our article are going to answer that question, it will be much more important. So at the same time, we should consider the interests of the readers of the journal too. As an example, just look at this article from New England Journal of Medicine who is trying to compare the low and high dose of radioiodine in treatment of patients with differentiated thyroid carcinoma. They, in the first sentence, they mentioned the frequency of the cancer, and in the second sentence, they mentioned the standard treatment, which is total thyroidectomy followed by radiodiene therapy. And then they address the controversies with mentioning the meta-analysis or systematic review that they found that a systematic review of randomized observational studies was inconclusive in the results, that if high or low dose is important for that, is preferred actually. So finally, in the last sentence, they mentioned that in this randomized non-inferiorly factorial study called HILO trial, they aimed to determine whether low-dose radioiodine could be used instead of high-dose radioiodine. They clearly come to the final question, that what is the question this article is going to answer. Compare that one with this other introduction regarding the in an article that are going to compare low and high dose. You see that the iodine uptake, iodine 131 was discovered in 1938 by Glenn Seaborg and John Livincourt at the University of California, Berkeley. It's the major fission product of uranium, plutonium, and decays by beta emission. It has a radioactive decay half-life of about 8 days and blah, blah, blah. And then the first report of use of radioactive iodine for treatment of metastatic thyroid cancer was published by Seidlin in 1948. Yeah, you can see that it is completely redundant and does not add more to the question that our authors are going to answer. So this kind of introduction may be proper for an article which are going to address the historical aspects of radioiodine treatment, but it is completely incorrect and not appropriate for an article who is going to address compare the high dose and low dose. Sometimes the hypothesis is incorrect. Just as an example, the aim of the present study was to find correlation between gated aspect with non-attenuation correction and attenuation correction images sets in myocardial perfusion aspect. You can see that it is an improper hypothesis, as all of you know that if you do a attenuation correction, you may find easily a correlation between attenuation corrected and non-attenuation corrected. So the question is actually incorrect. In the method section, actually you can start writing your article with the section of the methods, because you have already that. Because any research is the results of a proposal, and the proposal you need to write all of the sections, especially the methods. So you have the methods. If there is any modification during the study, you should change it, but you should write the methods easily. So you can start writing your article from methods. It should be detailed, clear, and reproducible, and you should describe the population studies, include inclusion and exclusion criteria, and also inclusion and exclusion criteria. Just as an example of insufficient description of the population studies, you can see that there were 176 subjects who underwent one-day protocol stress, exercise, stress-rest myocardial perfusion by using tetraphosphate in nuclear medicine department. Actually, it is very insufficient and short introduction of the patients, which may not be acceptable. Also, we need to describe the technique and the accuracy of any measurements of the test, its precision or its variance, and at the same time, if we are going to introduce a new method in our article, we need to validate it. As an example, you can see that here thyroglobulin was measured using immunoradiometric assay with functional sensitivity of 0.35. They mentioned the kit that they used and the country that kit came out from, and intra-assay variation and intra-assay variation is also mentioned. This is the correct method that you need to mention in laboratory studies. And in the methods also you need to mention the statistical analysis. it's very important to mention that if the group that you studies are have a normal distribution or not, and for the descriptive analysis, what kind of analysis you have done, and also if you have performed the inferential statistic, you need to mention it too. Either chi-squares or t-test or Cox proportional hazard regression, all of them should be mentioned. Also, we need to mention the ethical issues and consent if we had in the methods. But the most important thing is that the most common reason of rejection of articles lies in the section of the methods. So most of the articles which are rejected from a journal are due to improper method or problem in writing the method appropriately. So it is very important to pay attention to this section. In the results section, we need to clearly describe the most relevant findings. Usually most of the young scientists prefer to mention all of the data that they have, but some of them may not be relevant, and they may confuse the readers and also the reviewers and the editors. So it is important to be more clear and also mention just the most relevant findings. Usually you need to use past tense, and you should not use a lot of abbreviation. It is better first report shortly the results in all of the patients, then mention any missing data and exclusion, and finally report in the remaining patient. Like this one that we studied 383 DTC patients with mean age of X, and 94 patients had antithyroglobulin level of more than 100. That was considered as positive antithyroglobulin antibody level, and they were excluded from the study. The other thing that you should pay attention in the results is the figures and tables. Figures and tables should supplement the text and not repeat the findings. Just as an example from European Journal of Nuclear Medicine, this article who is going to address the lung uptake, high lung uptake in the myocardial perfusion scan, you can see that this image shows you the region of interest over the cardiac and over the lung, and also in two different patients with normal and abnormal. So you have a lot of information to get from this image. Compare this one with this article from one of the cardiology journals that are going to report the rate of hard cardiac events in patients with normal and abnormal myocardial perfusion scan. You can see that it can be written just in a one sentence that patients with abnormal myocardial perfusion scan has hard cardiac event of 7.4 compared to 0.6 in the patients with normal scan. So there is no need to put such a figure in an article at all. The articles should have a rich information that the reviewers and the editors accept it as a figure. You can see here that in this three-dimensional image, you have the left ejection fraction here, and you have the number of the coronary arteries which are involved here, and at the same time you had the cardiac death rate in the other axis. So it is important to have such a rich information here. The tables also have the same issues. A table should give you a lot of information, like in this table, which are again, this is addressing the cardiac event rates in different groups. They are classified as class 1, 2, 3, and they compared in different genders, different age groups, different stress types, and you can see that the numbers, the percent is written in patients who had events or who do not had events, and also they compared it using chi-square test, and you can see the p-value over there. So you have a lot of information which is given in one table. It is an appropriate type of tables. It's important, again, that do not use words like substantially or markedly. Instead, we need to use statistically significant, and we should provide p-value. The other issue in results is that we do not need to interpret results here. Interpretation should be done in the discussion. As an example again, you can see that here blood pressure was significantly higher in patients with hyperlipidemia, and they gave a p-value. It is incorrect. It is better to write that the mean systolic blood pressure was 140 in patients with hyperlipidemia and 105 in patients without hyperlipidemia. This is the appropriate type. And the final section is discussion. Actually, the discussion should summarize the main findings of this study, and also we need to briefly compare the results with other studies, either concordant or discordant, and we need to explain the difference. We also need to comment on the clinical application of our work and how this application adds to our knowledge. And also we need to criticize our methods, and we mention the limitations and advantages of our study. And finally, we need to end up with a conclusion that will be a short paragraph, just one sentence or two sentences. Sometimes the article came to a journal with a long conclusion of more than 2 paragraphs. It means that it seems that it is quite inappropriate, because the conclusion of any article should be summarized in 1 or 2 sentences. And finally, we may have acknowledgement in the article, but the most important part of the article is title and abstract, because most of the editors or editor-in-chiefs may just read the title and abstract. So it is very important to focus on this part. Also, it is important for the readers. Most of the readers look at the title and abstract and then decide to download your article or cite your article or not. So the title and abstract should be the last part of the article that you are going to write. It should be, the title should be written in simple English, and it should be attractive, but not non-scientific. Just as an example, a case of dupable, duple, duplicity, and duplexity. It may be interesting, but it is quite non-scientific. So sometimes the title is a question that you are going to answer. Like this one, can the reversible regional wall motion abnormality on stress-gated systemic aspect predict a future cardiac event? Or sometimes it is the main result of your study, that incremental prognostic value of myocardial perfusion aspect in elderly. But you should be very careful that if you put the question on the title, if you cannot answer it clearly, your article most likely will be rejected. We need to mention if we have performed a randomized trial, and also we need to consider the reader's interest. It is suggested that we work on 4 or 5 different titles and then finally select one of them that is most appropriate. And the abstract is also have the same. We need to look at the instruction to authors regarding the word limits, and also we need to mention the importance of study, the question to be answered, and brief description of the methods and results, and also key findings. Finally, I would like to introduce just this website, Equator Network, that will give you different checklists for reporting of your study. Either it is a randomized trial that you need to follow Concurrent checklist, or observational study, you need to follow a Storbe checklist, and you can find all of them here. And thank you for your attention. Okay, the next talk is by Professor John Buscambe, and he will teach us about peer review of a scientific article.
Thank you very much. I'm going to say, some of what I'm going to say is very similar to what we've already heard, because obviously these things are fairly true, and I think they bear repetition. So hopefully my slides will be starting. So there we are. And as you can see, I'm presently, at least until December, the editor-in-chief of the World Journal of Nuclear Medicine. So what's my experience? Well, for about 30 years, I have been an author submitting papers. So as they say, I can feel your pain. But also, I have been a peer reviewer for at least about 30 different journals over 25 years. So I also feel the pain of the reviewer as well. And then as an editor, I have to try and balance everything between those two. So what's the nuts and bolts of peer review? Well, I know it sounds a bit silly, but we'll just go through what the processes are. So an author or group of authors write a scientific paper. They decide which journal they wish to submit it to, and even that can be quite important. And one of the things that we do suggest is you look at the journal that you want to submit to online, even if sometimes the journal you have to pay for. They often have articles which are free, so you can see what kind of things they're interested in. The most important thing is to read the instructions to the authors. And I would say that about 80% of the problems I have is that because people they either read it and don't understand it, or they don't read the instructions to authors. They submit the paper to the journal, normally on a sort of email website thing. The days of having to do paper applications are fortunately gone. Often you need to provide a covering letter and possibly a copyright form. Now, there's always a time when you need a copyright form. That may be at the beginning of the process or at the end. Now, there's normally a submission website, but that is normally controlled by the publisher, not with the editor. So if you have a problem with the website, you could write endless emails to the editor, but they can't change the website. So you need to contact the publisher. The publisher then tends to let the editor know that a paper has been submitted. Now, the editor does normally, depending if they have time, does a first review of the paper, and this is primarily just to check it's suitable for the journal. So, for example, we had a very nice paper on yoga sent to the World Journal of Nuclear Medicine, which had nothing to do with nuclear medicine at all. I have no idea why the person sent it to the World Journal of Nuclear Medicine. It wasn't a bad paper, but it's certainly something that we would not publish. So we do a sort of first just check, just to make sure that there's no problems. We also try to check it for ethical issues. So, for example, if it's a human study, we'll be looking for consent and evidence of that as well. And there is, under various requirements we have as editors, we are required to do this. And you will see that in the instructions to authors. We then have the great fun of choosing somebody to actually review the paper. Now, in many journals, the authors can suggest people, and those suggestions may be taken up or may not be taken up. Often, when you look at the front of a journal, it's got the editorial board, and they tend to be chosen because they've got a mixture of areas of specialty, and quite often one of those will be chosen to be one of the reviewers, if not both the reviewers. Now, the other thing is that if you submit papers to a journal on a particular topic, that editor knows you're quite interested in that topic. So you may find that, sadly, even though you don't get your papers accepted, you may be asked to referee a paper on the same topic. So that's just saying, because editors are always looking for people who are willing to review. Now, they send out the papers, obviously, again, everything's done electronically. It used to be done by papers, now electronic. And normally we have a 2 to 4 week limit for getting the reviews back. Now, normally we say 2 weeks and we expect 4. So there tends to be a sort of little bit of leeway in that, and there's various different reminders that are sent out to reviewers. Now, the reviewers send back their thoughts on paper. That might be free-written, or quite often in papers now in journals, there's a sort of tick box thing and then comments that are added. There is one Italian journal which requires you to interact with a website for about an hour on every review. So I'm surprised to get anybody to review stuff. Then the editor collates the reviews and then sends the results back to the author. And in most journals, that's around about a 6-week process. So what can be the result of a peer review? Well, it can be accepted unchanged. Quite rare, to be honest, because 2 minds are always better than one. And the reviewer may say, that's a brilliant paper, but I just didn't quite understand what was happening in that part. Could they just make that a bit clearer? And it'd be even better. So first of all, don't get depressed if it comes back with, we'd like a few revisions. So actually what we're trying to do is just make that paper just a little bit better, okay? So we have an accept with minor revision. If your paper's accepted, that's often the most common thing, and it tends to be 2 or 3 different things that you just need to do. Sometimes it may just be a simple mistake that you made when you retyped it or something, or didn't delete something, so a sentence doesn't make sense. Then the next one is just needs revision, which is that it's pretty well soluble. We think that we can get this paper published, but you need to make some changes. When it says major revision, that is probably just on the cusp. To be honest, it's probably not going to get published. But if you can make these big changes, there's a chance. And that often is to do with methodology. Then there's rejection. Okay, nobody likes rejection, but it's a fact of life, unfortunately. And there's something else, which is technical modification. So some journals have this thing, which is not that your paper's not very good, but you haven't read the instructions to authors, and you now need to redo bits of your paper to fit in to the journal style. And that is, unless you do that, some publishers are unable to process the actual paper to get it to publication. Now, what will happen if a paper needs revision? Well, the reviewer will suggest improvements, and the authors need to read that very carefully. And what hopefully they would do is they would amend their text to what the reviewer says. Now, it may be they're all human and the reviewer you think is wrong. Okay, that's not a problem. So all you need to do is to write to the editor in the normally little box that they provide on the sort of answer sheet why you think the reviewer is wrong. And often the editor will accept that. Okay? And it may be that you might need to add one or two other references just to sort of increase your evidence. So remember, your review is also human. Okay? You submit the altered paper with a list of your changes, and if the changes are not too major, normally the editor will say, that's fine, we'll put the paper through for publication. If there's still concerns, it may go back to the reviewer for a second review. So once the paper is accepted, it's passed from the editor to the publisher. The paper will then join the queue for publication. Now, factors affecting publication time, for example, the number of issues a journal has per year, number of pages, etc. Reviews tend to have the shortest time to publication. Reviews tend to be partly because they sometimes are commissioned, but also most journals are quite short of reviews. Case reports have the longest wait. So if you put in a case report, it might be 18 months before you see it come out. The publisher will need time to composite the paper and then send proofs for corrections. I know you've waited 3 months for the proofs, but I know they ask for it in 48 hours, but that's the way life works. Once the proofs are corrected, the paper may be available on some journal sites as an e-publication, and even maybe go on to things like PubMed as an EPUB, so people can already start to read it. Then the editor compiles each particular issue out of the accepted papers. Sometimes papers are so important that we enable them to jump the queue effectively. And even in my journal, we've done that a couple of times. And then it's available as an online or paper journal, which you can either read or you can download. So why are papers rejected? Well, the most common reason is the paper doesn't say anything new. Okay. Now, that just doesn't mean to say that you're not applying known information to a new group. So, for example, if you're the first people in your country to do PSMA imaging, it may be a totally valid paper to do that. Okay. Now, it may be that that won't be published in a very high citation journal, but other journals may well be interested. But if it's just following somebody else's experiment and you get pretty much the same results, it's probably unlikely to be published. And I think, as we said before, it's the methodology which is the key, because it was a scientific paper, so the methodology is really the key. If you can get that right and it's understandable, then probably that improves your chance of publication. Please do not make assumptions that the person reading the methods has your knowledge. So if you say something that's very technical and because you know it really well, don't always expect the reader to do that, and you may need to explain a little bit more. And often when a reviewer comes back with a comment, it is, please explain what you did in a little bit more detail. And we've had some nice examples of that. Obviously, plagiarism, either of other people's work or your own work, will result in a rejection. And if you do it more than once or twice, you may be blacklisted from particular publishers' journals. So please don't do that. Representing previously published data, what was known as a salami cutting. So I'd publish my first 10 patients, then my next 15 patients, and then my next 20 patients. Really doesn't work very well. But it may be appropriate. For example, you have a first report, 20 patients, and a final report of 120 patients. That's fine, but make it clear you've already published the earlier ones. We may again find out that an identical paper has been published in 2 journals. We've seen that a couple of times. Obviously, that results in your paper being deleted. And the other thing is gross violations of the instruction to authors and refusal to amend it. And these are things like the way that abstracts are laid out, because they just can't be processed. There's no point carrying on if the authors won't change it. So how to improve your chance of success? Read the instruction to authors. Do what is required for that journal. Now, the main problem is you send it off to, let's say, the Journal of Nuclear Medicine, and it comes back rejected, and you think, oh, but I'll get it into the World Journal. They take anything. But the problem is what you do is you don't change anything, you send it off in the Journal of Nuclear Medicine format. So it might be a paper that I can publish, but it's on the wrong format. So it has to come back to you because you need to reformat it so we can process it. So do at least have the courtesy to read the instructions to authors. Now, some journals outside the United States will expect you to use SI units. Okay, so SI units are things like becquerels and not millicuries. So don't, again, make the mistake of using wrong units. Now, you're probably not going to get a paper rejected because of that, but if it's borderline, then people say, well, they can't even be bothered to check the instructions for authors, so I'm not going to accept the paper. Try to keep the paper short, but include all the required details. Now, this is just a guide, but a good guide is at the introduction. When you type it out on a sheet of print of A4 on the computer, should be about 1 page double-spaced. Methods and materials 1 to 2 pages. Results 1 to 2 pages. Discussion 1 to 2 pages. As I said before, the conclusion should be short. And I said in the methods, don't assume specialist knowledge. If you're going to use official initials, try to write these out first time. So, for example, finally Lasbrook FNA. Now, in nuclear medicine, to be honest, you probably don't need to do that for TC99M or PET because everybody knows what they mean. Graphs are a better way to present data than tables. When you've got 20 tables in a paper, it almost becomes unreadable. So if you can present the information graphically, that is very good. And as we said before, the text in the results section should explain the tables and graphs and figures and not just repeat what's in them. Check statistics, and if appropriate or unsure, ask a statistician. Okay, don't assume you know it. Keep the discussion focused, your results versus similar studies, maybe how your results can be applied. And if you're using colour, check the journal will enable you to do that or will charge you for it. And if you're not confident in English, ask for help. Now, the person who can look at your paper doesn't need to be a medical doctor or a nuclear medicine doctor. They could be anybody, really. And if you're really stuck, there's an organisation called the British Council, and they're available in most countries except Russia, where I think they've just been expelled. And normally they're really quite helpful. And I've known a few people who've gone along to British Council and they've actually helped just get a paper into reasonable English for you. So there's nearly always help somewhere. But if you're in a university, there'll be somebody who's reasonably good at English in that university. Okay. We seem to have lost the ability to move forwards. Right. Can you appeal against a rejected paper? Well, we're all human. We can all make mistakes. If you feel your paper should be published, then contact the editor explaining why you feel the paper should be published. I have to say, normally the editor will uphold what the reviewer's decision is, but it can be reversed. And I've done this once in the last 6 years where I felt, in fact, that the authors were right and the reviewer made a mistake. And we did, in fact, publish the paper. So it's not forever, no, but I think on the reality tends to be that it's unlikely that they'll accept it for that journal. So, summary. Peer review is the best method to ensure the quality of scientific publications. I think we haven't found anything better than that. Maybe with artificial intelligence that will change, but at the moment we're still using human intelligence. Do not be afraid of the peer review process. It's there to try and improve what you're writing. Remember, even though you're an author now, next year or next week you might be a reviewer. So that's the whole point about peer review, is you have both functions. Don't let peer review put you off writing and submitting papers, but let it be part of the process to improve what you're doing. But I do keep asking you to do this. Please read the instructions for authors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Buscambe. And the next talk will be about authorship and ethics, and I'm glad to introduce Professor Seiko Kinoyo, Editor-in-Chief of Annals of Nuclear Medicine. Please.
Good afternoon. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Annals of Nuclear Medicine and serving Professor Zakabi as Associate Editor of the Asian Oceanian Journal of Nuclear Medicine and Biologics. And as an editor in many journals, I experienced a lot. I mean, bad things. So why the people are doing misconduction. Probably all of you know this phrase, publish or perish. Then researchers at my age do not need to be a misconduction. I mean, duplication or salami publication or something else. So I really want young people here understand the meaning of ethics. Otherwise, you'll be punished. Anyway, let's start. Oh yeah, by the way, this is a very old books concerning about the medical writing. Although this book is already out of market. So if you find this one in a second-hand market or let's say Amazon or something else, so just buy it. Fortunately enough, we Japanese have a Japanese translation books, so it's okay for us. Anyway, this is a pretty nice one. Believe me. And then my talk today is based on the concept of these associations. If you have never been to the website of this one, go there and then know what ethics or what authorship means. And I show you something from the Japanese eras. Probably many of you know this scandal. This lady doctors claim that the stem cell can be made just with simple stimulation with chemical drugs. So it was all fake. And then this lady doctor published several papers in Science or Nature, and then all of them are denied now. And then this one is a kind of a terrible one caused by company person. Novartis. The Novartis has a big human study in Japan with this drug, valsartan. And then this company person was involved in the analysis of the data, and then he faked the data. And then this article was published in big one, such as New England Journal or a Journal of Clinical Investigation or something. So, and then this doctor of Tokyo University of Tokyo, had a terrible misconduction, and they fired. But I showed the 3 cases of Japanese doctors. Every Japanese doctors are very serious about the ethics. So these are just examples. This may happen everywhere. See, this is an article in Science, and there are a lot of faked reports. And then I was shocked to see this information that the 80% of data from Chinese clinical trial are fabricated. Yeah, the Chinese government declared this. So I'm sorry if there's Chinese people here, but this is true. So we have to think about something from this information. So today I will show you some example which I experienced by myself. This is a paper submitted to my journal, Annals of Nuclear Medicine, and then this is related to the iron 131 spec CT scintigraphies. So you can imagine, you can recognize the similarity of these 2 papers. This was already published in a different journal, and then this was just submitted to our journals. And then we found they were quite similar. And then analytical method and the conclusion of the submitted paper to our journal is the same to the previous journal. And then after the investigation, we judged this misconduction, and then it's a pure duplication of the previous data. And then this is a second case of redundancy. It's a kind of salami submission. And then original paper from, these three papers are submitted from the same authors. And then this is the original one, published in an esteemed journal related to the nuclear medicine. You can understand what this means. Anyway, he submitted two different papers to Annals of Nuclear Medicine, my journals. Probably you can understand what they did. Not they, he did. I mean, first author did. So in this case, the data set was all same, and then the only first paper include all of the information about that. And then they pick up some data from the first set, and then submitted a different paper, and then we didn't find it at the occasion of the submission of this paper, so we just accepted and then published. And then he sent to me the third one. At that moment, we recognize it. So this is a kind of terrible case. So, oh yeah, we have an associate editor of Annals of Nuclear Medicine there. I think he found this. And then, so we punished the first author as the most serious conditions. We quit 5 years submission from him. And then A was rejected, and then B was retracted from the publication. So this publication disappeared from the literature. Third one is a different kind of duplication. All of them are related to the myocardial perfusion studies in chronic kidney diseases. Clearly, you understand these are same topics. And then all of them are submitted to my journals. I would say he's stupid. And then sometimes authors did duplication non-intentionally. This means this is a Korean researchers, and then they first submitted their paper to the Indian Journal of Nuclear Medicine. And then they couldn't get any response for 3 months, even after repeatedly asking what happened in the editorial board. And then they determined to retract submission, and then send the paper, official paper, to the editorial office of Indian Journal. And then they resubmitted the same paper to the Japanese Journal of Radiology. At that moment, I was an associate editor of this journal. And then, without any response from Indian Journal just published it. So we had 2 publications in the literature. The author did not intend anything. So this is a non-intentional case. However, some cases, the young researchers do this kind of things intentionally. And then this, you see, there is pretty similar title, and then the title, not on title, and the abstract is pretty similar. And then this was published in 2011, and then this one was submitted to Annals of Nuclear Medicine 3 years later. And then we are lucky, though, we found that there is the same paper in the literature. And then we just simply rejected this one in this case. So in many cases, this kind of redundancy can be found during the review process. Most of cases can be found. So think this. And then this is just a simple, slight increase of the patient number. I mean, as Dr. Buscombe told us that let's say 20 patient data can be submitted as a preliminary report, and then they increase number in a huge scale. So it's okay. However, simply at the, let's say, 49 to 74, nothing. The information or message provided by these two papers are same. So we have to say these are redundancy. So we rejected this one. And then sometimes, this is a very international meeting, so there are a lot of people from many countries. So this case is redundancy in English journal and Japanese journals. So these are same patient case report. Probably, let's say 20 years ago, it's okay. However, it's not okay. I mean, literature, I mean, let's say PubMed or any other kind of such kind of repository, all of the languages were there. And then even Japanese papers in PubMed, I mean, abstract is English, so it will be introduced into PubMed. So the different language, no, it's not good enough to have a priority of the new papers. With what conditions we can accept duplicated, I mean, secondary publication? So these are pretty common sense in editors, and then these types of information can be obtained from the website, which I previously shown to you. So let's say two editorial boards here and there, and then both of them should agree the secondary publication, and the information or data of the two papers should be exactly same, and then we can have a secondary publication in different journals. And then the more important thing is that the audience is different. So well, think of for Japanese audience, the paper was written in English, and then this one should be distributed in the Japanese community, and then both editorial boards are discussing, and then when we have an agreement each other's, so we accept the secondary publication. And this is a very terrible case I experienced. This is a simple case report of bone scintigraphy, and then this is submitted to my journals, and then we sent to this one to the reviewers, and the reviewer just found these articles on the same topic published in Indian Journal of Nuclear Medicine. See, pretty same, or I would say just same. These two papers are submitted from different groups. There's no possibility that such kind of identical paragraph exists from the different authors. And yeah, this is another case of the different authors. Yeah. Anyway, let's skip this. This is a pretty funny case. This paper was published in Journal of Nuclear Medicine 2 years ago, and then these authors use data set of these papers without permission to reuse, and then they analyze the data in a different way from the original authors, and then submit it to our journals. It's not fair. So we rejected it with some cautions to the authors. And then frequently we experience this type of mis-authorship. After the acceptance, authors, in this case, first author or let's say corresponding authors, request us to add one more name on the authors. Can you imagine why they want to do that? They want to have a gift, right? Gift authors. So this kind of the association clearly show us that the authorship should have the substantial contributions or contribution in drafting the research works or research work revising. And this is probably important point. All of the authors should final approval for the submitted papers. And then they have to accountable for all of the aspect of the research works. So take-home message today from me is think seriously about ethics, otherwise it will cost a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you've managed to write a good paper, you've avoided plagiarism, and you've got it into a journal. And the next thing you want to know is what's the journal's impact factor? What does that mean? So now we're our great pleasure to have Professor Ignacio Carrier, who is the editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Nuclear Medicine and Molecular Imaging, which is a high citation impact journal, to talk about impact factors of journals. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the impact factor is important because it is intuitive, easy to understand, and stays there despite other metrics have been proposed. But the impact factor is not without problems. And you have to be aware how the impact factor is calculated, by whom, and what should you keep in mind when you decide to which journal you are going to submit. If you go into the Web of Science and you check the journal citation reports, you have to be aware that the group that is owning the metrics, the journal citation reports, was until 2018 Thomson Corporation. And since last year, if you navigate this website often, you may have noticed that the name is now no longer Thomson Corporation, it's Clarivate and Analytics. Well, this is a private company. It's a private enterprise. This company owns the metrics by which we are judged. If you check the web to understand who these people are, you will notice that they are a company that protect and commercialize new ideas. They offer services to the companies as to where they should invest. This is a description on the web of such a company. They indicate that they are uniquely positioned to support businesses throughout the innovation life cycle and continue to invest aggressively in enhancing existing solutions and developing new ones. So this is a company that makes business out of the information that lies in the website, in the Web of Science. As mentioned before, you need to publish, or you will be either fired or terminated or whatever. So you need to publish, and you need to publish in journals that are high rank, that have a significant impact factor. I mean, our journal has an impact factor now of 7.2. It's our 14th anniversary, and we have developed a family of journals to accommodate articles that did not reach sufficient priority for the mother journal, but they deserve to be published. So we now have started a family of journals that one has to do with research, has already an impact factor of 2. We have a physics journal that will have an impact factor this year. We have a radiopharmacy and chemistry journal, not yet an impact factor. And we have another clinical journal, which is called the European Journal of Hybrid Imaging, to accommodate clinical papers that have no space or enough priority for the mother journal. Why do we do this? And this is because the number of articles we can publish, and all journals tend to publish, is low, in the sense that it has to be in proportion with the number of citations we have. The impact factor is calculated by the number of citations you get divided by the number of articles you publish. You can easily imagine that if you publish too many articles, that detracts from the impact factor. So it's a fine-tuning. Therefore, most journals have a limit in the number of articles they publish, and we do the same. So when the calculation of the impact factor is done like this, you have to understand that all journals tend to receive more and more articles every year. For example, our journal, notice in 2016, we received close to 1,200 articles. If you add the revised ones, it's 1,500 articles. But we only publish around 300 a year. I mean, to protect our impact factor. If you check the journals in medicine that have the highest impact factor, such as New England or this type of journals, they publish a small number of articles. They publish opinion letters, but I mean, original articles, they publish very few. I mean, again, to protect the impact factor. So all journals face this problem, a continuing rise in the number of submissions. You have to understand that that happens. And that's another argument for you not to take personally when an article is rejected. You have to understand how journals have to deal with the submissions and how they must assign priority for publication after peer review. Having an article rejected, as has mentioned before, happened to all of us. It's part of the game we play. You don't need to take that personally. Never. All of us get sometimes articles rejected. Most journals nowadays are global, so the game you will play is a global game. Despite the journal can be the Japanese journal or a journal that relates to a given country, at the end, submissions are global. All journals receive articles from all over the world, depending on the impact factor, but all journals nowadays play a global game. So getting to the impact factor, keep in mind that the impact factor has a very narrow time window. By definition, we cannot help. It was defined like this. So the impact factor is calculated by the sites in a given year. For example, the last impact factor, which is the 2016, is sites in 2016 to articles published in the two previous years, 2014 and 2015, divided by the number of articles published in this time window, in these 2 years. That gives a number, and that's the impact factor that is released every year. So this year, in 2018, the 2017 impact factor will be released approximately by mid-June. And again, the impact factor will be calculated with the sites in 2017 to articles in 2015 and 16 divided by this number of articles. So for the journals, it is very important to adjust the number of articles published to the number of citations that we receive. Then, I mean, there are other indices. For example, the total number of citations, which is another metric. Something that you need to check is the percent of these sites that are self-citations, so citations that come from the same journal. There is a limit to that, which is roughly 15%. So the Web of Science pays attention that the rate of self-citations does not go over 15%. In our case, in 2016 was 12%. Total sites that accumulate in the website, this is always growing, of course, but it's another measure, another metrics to see how often an article a journal is cited. Another important metric is the immediacy index that you have to check too. The immediacy index of a journal is an index that reflects how fast articles become visible and are cited. And it is calculated by the cites in a given year to articles of the same year. This is, for example, the evolution of the immediacy index for our journal. It reflects how rapid the articles become visible and citable. There are other indices. There is the cited half-life. So that's the median age of the item cited, in our case, around 6 years. There is the citing half-life. This is the median age of the items the journal cited. There are new metrics. There is the eigenfactor, which is calculated in a more complex way, takes into account the quality of the journals that cite you. So it favors that citations that come from important journals, say. That's another way. The impact factor counts all citations, whatever they come. But the eigenfactor gives us a weight to the different citations. The problem with these metrics is that they are complicated, they have strange names, and they are more difficult to embrace. This is why the impact factor stays, despite the limitations of the limited time window. Another problem, for example, now that we discussed about ethics, I still remember that the citations to the Korean papers on the stem cells that were fake, it was already known that they were fake, but the citations were still counted for the impact factor of science, which is not fair. So the impact factor has problems and limitations, but it stays because it has a nice name, very intuitive name, a strong name. Another metric is the influence article score, and that's an index that reflects the importance of it takes into account the clinical relevance or the professional relevance of the citations you have. It's already there. Then there is the 5-year impact factor, and that's a measure that takes into account 5 years, not only 2. It's another way of having an idea of the impact of the publications in a given journal. So this is the photo now. Where do we stay? I mean, when you consider to publish in the field of nuclear medicine and molecular imaging, I believe that it is fair for you to start aiming to a journal with a high impact factor, and then if the paper is rejected, then you can go down the list and try to incorporate what was raised in the review. That will always strengthen your manuscript. Try to incorporate the ideas you got, from the feedback you got from the reviewers, and then aim for another journal. So notice that in general, the journals that have a high impact factor have also a high immediacy index. And the other metrics also tend to be high. But the impact factor stays as the main reference. This is the list of all the journals that have impact factor in the field of nuclear medicine and molecular imaging. But others will come in the future, I'm convinced, because despite we are a very small field, we are extremely active on scientific grounds. And we produce a lot of papers throughout the world. If we look at the subject category. I mean, the Web of Science tends to group the journals in what they call subject categories. We are put into a category that includes radiology, includes nuclear medicine, and medical imaging, includes radiotherapy as well. In Europe, still, the EGNMMI has the highest impact factor as compared to radiotherapy journals. It is followed by radiotherapy and oncology. And in general, radiology journals tend to have a lower impact factor than our journals, which I believe indicates that we publish a lot, we produce a lot, and we produce articles that are relevant and contribute to the impact factor of our journals. If I have time, I will make a couple of comments that might be sensible to you. It was mentioned that the title for you is important. I mean, wrong titles here, too long or complicated. You can easily see that these titles are almost impossible to read. Dual tracer imaging approach in assessing tumor biology and heterogeneity, neuroendocrine tumors, its correlation with that's impossible to follow, right? A good title has to be short, straightforward, and have a compelling message. For example, the one below. Preoperative risk stratification using metabolic parameters of FDG PET-CT in patients with endometrial cancer. That's a short, compelling title. The abstract, I'd like to add that it has to be reader-friendly. So when you structure your abstract, try to make it balanced, visually balanced. So the size of the purpose of the methods of results and conclusion is balanced. So this is a good abstract, reader-friendly. The paragraphs are self-explanatory. That's a wrong abstract. It's not reader-friendly. It's, the paragraphs are too long. The conclusion section is also very, very long. The results and methods are full of abbreviations. Those tend to confound everyone. So keep in mind that the abstract has to be reader-friendly because it's the first, as commented before, is the first that we, the editors, read. Then you have to be aware that nowadays, to prevent plagiarism, most journals have implemented or are implementing these machines that search the web. Is a robot that stays 24 hours searching the web for similar paragraphs. The software we use in our case, it's named Authenticate. And when an article enters the journal, the robot starts searching the web for similar paragraphs. So the robot reads the article and starts searching the web. And in 24 hours, I have a report of the degree of similarity. You see, for example, here, in the report, there is the similarity check. The output is 10% of the article has paragraphs that are similar to others published by different authors. I have realized that I can accept up to 15% of similarity. For review articles, it's unavoidable that the similarity is higher because review articles have to quote what has been done by others. And that brings a percent of similarity that can reach up to 25 or even 30% at maximum for a review article. But be aware that we now have systems to check the web for similar paragraphs to the ones you may have used. This is, for example, an article that has an excess of similarity. The output is 32%. Those are immediately declined. It has been mentioned before. What do you have to do if your paper is rejected? I will add that you don't need to send angry letters. That will never help. And I have seen letters such as those. The reviewers were unable to understand the paper, or reviewer number 2 is totally ignorant, or rejection after such useless reviews is unacceptable. I had one that sent to me an email saying, I'm happy that you rejected my paper as it was then rapidly accepted in New England. But it was a lie because I was checking New England and it never came out. And I had an extreme case. I mean, you'd never have to take that personally, but an author sent to me an email saying that my rejection had destroyed his life, and he was about to divorce. He said, "My company will sing, and I may commit suicide," he said. So, come on. Come on. By no means you have to take this personally. And good luck with your publication.
Ignacio and Sego, do you mind coming to join the panel? Any questions? Yes. Can you come to the microphone for your questions? Because I know some people can't seem to be loud, but sound doesn't travel very well, so that'll be kind.
Okay. It's too high. Thank you all. That was really, really helpful, I think, to all of us here. I think, well, I have lots and lots of questions and comments buzzing around in my mind. I appreciate that you've said, don't lose heart if you get rejected. And I understand the huge bulk of material that you have to deal with. But having had our group have their almost life work rejected last year, everybody's totally lost heart. And the comments from the reviewers contradicted each other. And we could look at it, and we got some advice from other people, and they said, well, we could understand that you would have been asked to rewrite this or that, but why an outright rejection? Didn't make sense. And it seemed to me that what would be really good to happen would be if somehow or other this sort of group, or in our small national groups or state groups, we had some sort of a mentoring system set up so that you could say, well, what did I do wrong? What should I have done? How could I have improved it? Did we try to do too much in this article? And the more I think about it, I think we probably did. But then people wanted us to put in more, but it would have been the whole thesis, not, little bits. But it seems to me that some sort of mentoring process would be really good. And also, part of that process might also help people not to totally abandon what they're doing because they've completely lost heart. The next question, or
Shall
the
we
next...
go with that one first?
Yeah.
Because let's do one point at a time. So.
Who wants to take this one?
Yes, I understand. And I think that mentoring is quite important. And in fact, mentoring is nearly always available. And one of the things I think that, particularly if you're new to the whole area of getting things published, if you know there's somebody in your area or somebody that you know within your nuclear medicine society or national society, there's no reason you can't just send them the paper before you submit it and say, well, what do you think? I mean, sometimes I don't have time to do it, but I do that service happens to me occasionally. Somebody sends to me and said, we're not sure, doing this for you, got any ideas? So certainly I would sort of recommend that. And I think it's more difficult if you're a bit isolated. If you're in a sort of institution that already does quite a bit of publishing, there is probably a fairly natural mentoring system operating because there's nearly always a senior author involved who's got other papers. But I think if you are, let's say not in a big university hospital, but in a district hospital, but you still have something you want to publish, it can be quite difficult. So I think one of the things that you can do is maybe, if you do know a consultant or a professor somewhere else and feel that you can approach them and say, do you mind having a look at this? And it looks like you did that to some degree. Not always, doesn't seem to be terribly positive, but I think that you can always do a sort of pre-submission asking for advice as well. And what you can just say, we'd like to put this paper, this is what we put together, what do you think? Kind of thing.
Just one point. Thank you for your comment. Actually, this topic should be also addressed in the Association of Medical Editors, because some of the journals do not use blind reviewing, and this is the problem. If you put one of the very famous scientists among the authors, it may be easily accepted in most of the journals because they do not blindly review your articles. It is going to be standard that all of the journals should go to blind review. It means that the reviewers should not know that which author is the author of the article, and this will also happen to resolve in some part this issue. And the other issue, that if you are confident about your results, just go on and just go to send it to another journal. You may remember that the theory of relativity of the Einstein is rejected 2 times. And if you visit the house of Einstein in Zurich, you can find the letter of the editor-in-chief to him that this is completely useless and just assumptive, and there is no scientific data in it. So if you are confident about your result, just continue your work and send to another journal.
I think that your point is well taken. I mean, there should be some mentorship and some, say, formal training, because writing articles is a learning process itself, and you over time you learn how to explain what you did, and how to highlight the novelty, how to emphasize what is new as compared to other publications. Something that is important, I mean, in our case, we keep a non-blinded review. And this is because, well, one may argue that an experienced reviewer always identifies who is the group that has produced the article, and because almost all articles have some self-sites, I mean, even to shorten the method section, for example. Something we have implemented, and it's helpful, and it's not trivial, is that the author is asked to indicate preferred and non-preferred reviewers. And I pay very much attention to that. So the way you indicate preferred reviewers, you have to justify that. I suggest this person or this other person because they published before on the same line, or because whatever. And you have to indicate why some people could be biased against you. We are human beings, we have rivalries. So you can also indicate which reviewers or which groups could have a bias against your article and should not be selected as reviewers. And that we tend to follow very much.
Yes. I think you mentioned about the splitted case of the review process. I mean, one reviewer had a positive comment and then the other one had a negative comment. It's a good sign, because that such kind of paper will raise the discussion in the community, right? So it's a good sign. So you just simply submit it to different journals, and then you'll get the good response.
Let me just say something more. Most often we decide fast, not because we are rude, but because we want to save you time. So if one of the reviews is negative, despite the other might be positive, we tend to decline, because, I mean, in a highly selective journal, I mean, the reviewers must agree that the paper deserves to be published. When one of the reviewers is negative, I can go for a third one, but depending on the criticism, I mean, the priority of the paper is less. And when we decline, despite one of the reviews is positive, it's just to save you time. This is because we believe that if you go for a third one, that will not change or whatever.
Okay, Jack, you want a small question?
The next thing that we discovered to our shock, and we did query this and didn't get another answer, was that in order to be published, we had to pay an upfront fee of $2,000 before, it was non-refundable, before something would be reviewed. Now, some of the people in our group have certainly published in lots of places before, and they had not encountered this before, and I don't understand it. And I think from an ethical point of view in Australia, that would be considered to be some sort of an inducement to publish.
I know there are some journals, nuclear medicine journals, that do have that, and there are some institutions that will not allow you to pay for publication. my hospital won't allow it, but our university does, strange enough. So, depending where it comes from. So, yes, but I think, unfortunately, as we found out that time is not free, and one of the things that actually happens is that reviewers' time is not always free, and certainly for big journals, not nuclear medicine journals, I think, but things like New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet, reviewers are paid. So presumably it's a way of generating the money to pay the reviewers for their time. So my journal doesn't charge because nobody would pay, but to be honest. But it depends. Again, obviously, that the higher citation the journal, then there's more likely that they'll charge. I think you've got to comment on that.
Just one comment. You should be very careful about predatory journals. As a matter of fact, journal businesses started in the last few decades, and it is a dirty business. So you should locate the free journals, the journals which are published by the societies or by the universities and not by the private companies. And it is one of the most important things, because there are a lot of predatory journals that they ask you to submit the article for them, and they immediately accept your article even without reviewing. So these blacklist journals you can find in some of the websites. By one of the most important websites is website from Dr. Bell that used these listed these predatory journals. It is very important, and usually most of the journals, if they ask for the reviewing pay, it should not be much high. It should be about less than $100.
Yes, and I wrote an editorial on that in the World Journal because they particularly prey on younger authors, and I know how many unsolicited emails I get every day offering to publish my papers for up to $5,000 is the price that they, guaranteed open access. We can guarantee to publish any paper you send us. So, but I would again very strongly recommend that we try to resist that. If people didn't pay, these people will go out of business. But anyway, you have another?
Yeah, sort of a supplemental. I can understand that it costs money to go through this review process. I could understand that there could be some sort of a small application fee. In the long past, you would have to buy print copies. Well, that's sort of gone now, I suppose, because things are on the internet. I can understand that if you have to pay a fee to have your colour things put in, but that would be quite explicitly stated. But for us, $2,000 is a huge amount of money, and especially to be non-refundable and had to be paid before it would even be considered. It's easy to recognise that if someone wants to pay you to submit, that doesn't seem to be right. But the other way round, I thought, seemed to be just as hard.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who pays you to submit. I think, yeah. But I would personally always think very hard about submitting any paper to a journal that was charging $2,000 just to review, unless it was, I don't know, the one that's going to get a Nobel Prize type journal. But I think I personally, like you, find that very difficult. There are many journals. Because everything's available pretty well on the internet, you can get visibility for your paper from many different journals. So I would just, like every other market, if you feel it's too expensive, then go to a journal that's not charging that. Everything's a market, and as I said, market prices will be affected by that. So if they don't get any papers in, whatever. But I think, I do agree. I think that you have to decide what is right and fair for you to do. Though I do notice that some societies now even charge you to put an abstract in an annual meeting. So things are unfortunately changing. Any other questions? Come to the microphone.
I'm Sipat Temongkon from Thailand. I'd like to ask about a clinical trial that we need to register our project into like some website like clinicaltrial.gov or something else. And then my question is that when we register under one name, the title name, and when we want to publish it, after we finish our project, can we change the title name?
What I would do in that case is in your covering letter to the editor, explain that you've had registered this project under that website, under that name, but you now feel a different name is more appropriate for publication. And I have to say, as an editor, I quite often go back to authors and say, could you change the name? And the reason is the name is not just important for the fact that it helps the reader understand, but it also goes for indexing. So if people, when you put into PubMed, SpecCT or something, if the title really explains what's happening in the body of work, it will help the visibility of your paper for other authors and other readers to find your paper correctly. So I actually think that the title, you said do the title at the end. I think it's actually fine. So it may well be that when you've done everything, you think, well, actually, to be honest, we do need a better title. Just put it in the covering letter. I think that would be the way I would suggest doing that.
Just one comment. Actually, the philosophy behind registering in a clinicaltrial.gov or your national clinical trial organization is that you will be transparent by that way, because all of the information from the beginning of submission of your proposal and starting of your research is already written over there, so you cannot change it advertently. So the name of the title, or the title of the registration is not important. The body of the registration is much more important.
Okay, thank you.
And again, you may find you have to alter the method slightly, in which case, again, just put it in the covering letter. Okay.
Thank you.
This will be our last question, by the way, because I've been told we've got to finish.
Yeah, this is a bit of clarification that if a nuclear medicine original article is published in a nuclear medicine journal, can it be presented as an oral presentation to the same group of people, like nuclear medicine?
Most nuclear medicine conferences will ask you not to do that. It may be that you will publish your preliminary result. You would present your preliminary results to a nuclear medicine society meeting, and then subsequently you will publish them. And that's quite normal, and you normally acknowledge that by saying part of this data was presented at the What's in What's It Society meeting. Some nuclear medicine meetings, particularly the Society of Nuclear Medicine and Molecular Imaging, you have to sign that you have not previously submitted this data to any publication. So I think it's quite important that you do it the right way around, if you see what I mean. Now, it may well be that if you've got a nice paper, somebody will ask you to do a presentation, which is fine, because then you can present it and say, this is the work I have published, and that's what many of us have done. So that's what I would do, is if you're doing that, make it very clear that it's been published, that's where the journal it is. But I wouldn't put it in as an abstract. I think you'd then expect to be invited to present it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, yes, I have been given a piece of paper, which is to say that remind you that the Congress highlights and closing plenary will be promptly at exactly 1700. And also remind you that there's complimentary afternoon tea available in the exhibition and coffee which can be purchased. But I think you can actually, if you go to the back of the exhibition near the posters, you can get the coffee for free. So maybe go there for free coffee. And thank you very much. And can we thank all the speakers for a brilliant session?